Question 11 of 12. Phew, we're nearly there. So, what were the effects of the Great Terror purges? Background information. During the 1930s, Stalin set about purging Russia of anyone who he considered a threat or disloyal. He was able to do this, A, because he wanted to, but also he created the Decree Against Terrorist Acts, which meant he could execute anyone without trial for disloyalty in a climate of pending war. The Great Terror marked a massive crime against humanity. The effects of this arguably helped Stalin keep control, but in other ways they weakened Russia. So let's look at how. What were the effects of the Great Terror / purges? Remember, these two terms can be used synonymously, so they can replace each other. So they removed opposition. The Great Terror removed opposition. The threats of the old Bolsheviks were destroyed, if they ever existed as a threat in the first place. By 1940, they were all killed. Trotsky was the last to be murdered. He was murdered with an ice pick in Mexico by a hired hitman. Now, the executions of the old Bolsheviks were carried out with the facade of legitimacy created by the show trials, as the old Bolsheviks were forced to confess to plotting against Russia and plotting against Stalin. Now, the Great Terror had massive human costs. The Decree Against Terrorist Acts meant that anybody could be arrested and killed without trial. And the Black Ravens, who were the secret police known to swoop in at night like ravens under the cover of darkness and disappear people, could pick on anyone. Now, the Black Ravens, the secret police, were the OGPU. That is what the Cheka were renamed as in 1923. And then they were renamed again in 1934 as the NKVD. So across the Great Terror they had two names, the OGPU and the NKVD. I don't think anyone would pick you up on calling them the NKVD, because for the majority of Stalin's reign, that's what they were called, or time in power rather than reign. Now, the Black Ravens, or NKVD, as said, could target anybody. Nobody felt safe. Indeed, even Stalin's in-laws and cousins were arrested. So nobody trusted each other in Russia. And the level of anxiety must have been so heightened across the period. Many were executed. Approximately 1 million people were executed as part of the Great Terror. So the human cost was enormous. And far more were sent to gulags. Now, estimates change massively because there's no accurate records. Approximately 20 million, some people say, were sent to gulags, and approximately half of these people died as a result of illness, the inhumane working conditions, lack of food, cold, etc. As well as the human cost, you also have the effects on the economy. Just spotted, roll of others shouldn't be there, that should be human cost. Now, the effects on the economy and the military, let's include that as well, were somewhat mixed. Now, because of the Great Terror and the use of gulags, there was a large amount done through forced labour. For example, the Belomar Canal. The Belomar Canal was built as a result of forced labour. The farms were collectivised. So by 1937, 93% of farms were collectivised. So people were forced to collectivise. They didn't want to in mass numbers, but because of the Great Terror, they were scared into doing that. Russia became the second most industrialised country in the Western world. Some historians believe that the discipline in the factories brought about by the terror and the fear of the purgers were key in achieving this industrialisation. Finally, the purgers of the army in particular made Russia militarily vulnerable at a time when war was looming. When Hitler attacked Russia, they very nearly lost in 1941-2, and that was largely because of the lack of expertise in their army due to the killing of 81 out of 103 generals and admirals. And this is almost impossible to rationally argue. It seems to be the result of a very paranoid man. So here are the effects of the Great Terror / purges. You can see this as a revision card here, and you can read about it more in your revision guide on page 35 to 36. Remember to revisit these dual coding diagrams regularly before the exam to try to concrete the knowledge in your memory. And we have now finished 11 of 12 of the most likely questions to come up in Russia.